So I grew up listening to country and Western music. We might have some fans here of that tonight. And one of the guys that was popular whenever I was young was Randy Travis. You remember Randy Travis? And so Randy Travis he sang this song, and it starts out, he's talking about how like the City Slickers, how they sing these love songs, and they talk about love that's deeper than the ocean, love that's higher than the stars. But then he says, but I hear the ocean salty, and I hear the stars sometimes fall. And so he's like, how do I describe love, my love for my wife or my girl? How do I describe that in a language that she understands, that I understand? And so he says, my love is deeper than the holler, stronger than the river, higher than the pine trees growing tall upon the hill. My love is purer than the snowflakes that fall in late December, and honest as a robin on a springtime windowsill, and longer than the song of a whippoorwill. You guys remember that? Remember that song that he sang? I sometimes feel like John is a little bit like Randy Travis in how he's trying to describe the things that he sees. Right? Like God shows him this vision, and he's like, okay, you can write about this, you can write about this, you can write about this, and then he's trying to describe it. Right? And so here we are trying to piece together what he is describing with his own eyes. And how do you describe something like this? Right? Like that no eye has seen. Right? How do you describe heaven? And so he does his best to do that. And again, I want to remind you that there are different guys with different takes on these things concerning Revelation. We read this sometimes out of fear. We get this sense of dread or fear as we see the end approaching, but that's not how Revelation was meant to be. It's not meant to create fear in us. It's not meant to elicit fear in us if we belong to Christ. Revelation is meant to be a book of encouragement, not just that we win at the end, but how God delivers his people even in hard times. Okay, even as we see the end approaching. And so what I want to do is I want to read this text through, this entire chapter through, a fun chapter, and then really point out a couple things in this text as we sort of work our way back. Okay, so Revelation chapter 21, and it was asked what version I'm reading from. I'm reading from the ESV, like your pastor reads from. Then I saw, verse 1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the old things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it's done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and it will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Verse 9. Then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues and spoke to me, saying, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like the most rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, on them with 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Verse 15. And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates. The city lies 4 square, its length the same as its width. And he measured the city with his rod, 1,200 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. It's a cube, okay? Verse 17, he also measured its walls, 144 cubits by human measurements, which is also an angel's measurement. The wall was built of jasper, while the city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundation of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first were jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, and the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made of a single pearl, and the streets of pure gold, like transparent glass. Verse 22, and I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will glory into it. And the gates will never be shut by day. There will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter into it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. This is the reading of God's word. And there's a lot to unpack there, right? Like you could read this every day for a month and just sort of inch your way through that, maybe getting a grasp of it. So how are we going to get through this in 45 minutes? That's been sort of the challenge, right? Chris is trying to get through a chapter a week with such rich things. But I want to point out three truths that I think we can gather from this text today as we study and as we consider heaven, right? We love talking about heaven. We just buried one of our church members this last week who's experiencing heaven, who's experienced the presence of the Lord. And as we get older, don't we long for it a little bit more? Heaven. Number one, I want to point out that it's a place. It is an actual, literal place. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of heaven. A lot of times we think of heaven sort of spiritually, right? And this is sort of shaped a lot of times by maybe what we see on TV or maybe even cartoons growing up. You know, we would see we're sort of just floating on these clouds, right? Like we're wearing this clothing that sort of resembles a diaper, just playing a harp, and it doesn't sound real fun, right? You know, it's a little bit terrifying to sing Amazing Grace when we've been there 10,000 years, if that's what heaven's going to be like. Okay? We sort of think in a spiritual sense that we're just going to sort of be floating around, and certainly there's a tremendous element of spirituality here, but I want to look at the physical side of things. All right? John, he paints this picture of an actual physical place, and we see that even starting in verse 1, where it talks about this new heaven and this new earth being here because the old heaven and the old earth has passed away. That's what verse 1 is going to tell us that. You know, Peter's going to say in his book that the earth's been destroyed, or maybe translated refined by fire, and what emerges when Christ comes back is this new literal place, right? I mean, you ever stop to consider the beauty of the world that we live in? I'm sure you have. I mean, even in Oklahoma, you start getting into the east and things get real hilly, and there's lots of trees, and you drive out west and it's not like you have like the Wichita Mountains where I'm from, but it's a different type of beauty with the sunsets. And you even get further west out by Sayre, and then you're into these really great big not caverns. What am I thinking? The canyons, right? Canyons. Right? Even the beauty of a place like Oklahoma with the sun, I mean, it's just gorgeous, just different parts of our state. And then you expand out and you go to the United States and you see things like the Grand Canyon, and you're sort of blown away with things like that. Or you get on a plane and you fly down to places like Cancun, and the water's just as clear as can be, and these beaches are just beautiful white that God created in 6 days, right? He created everything that we see, us included, in 6 days, and just the magnificence of it. Have you ever stopped to consider that Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you, and then I'm going to come back for you? Like when he's done, he's going to come back for us. He's been working on this thing for 2,000 years, it seems as if. Can you imagine the beauty? The beauty of this new heaven in this new earth, absent of all the things we don't like, right? All the things that bring us down. We're going to get into that in just a second, but it is an actual physical place, this new heaven, this new earth. Verse 2, he talks about how this city in this new heaven, this new Jerusalem, how it comes down, right? Now we might have to work through that, not tonight, okay? You might have to work through this on your own, because what we talk about is us going up to heaven, being taken up to this place. John sees it coming down. Almost coming down to where we are in this new heaven, this new earth being established. He speaks here of the beauty of the place. I love the language that he uses in verse 2, where he says, I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for the husband. Same language in verse 9, come, I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And I think of my wedding day. I've been married 17 years this coming June. I told Janelle I wasn't going to talk about my wife Randy, but I'm going to talk about her. We get married, and the church is all there, and I'm standing there with my guys, with my groomsmen waiting, and the doors fly open, and there's my bride, and stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, take your breath away, stunning. Okay, that's what John is seeing here. We're this new heaven, this new, or this city coming down, prepared as this bride, this stunning bride, fit for the Lamb. It's a literal place with literal beauty. Verse 5 talks about this literal place. It mentions a throne, right? Verse 5, he was seated on the throne. Heaven is this literal place where Christ rules supremely forever and ever and ever. Now we get sometimes excited or bent out of shape depending on who's in the White House, right? I mean, have you ever stopped to consider how much your day is ruined by what you watch on the media? Depending on, I mean, it's a great victory if it's going how you want it and how quickly that is changed. And I've told my church, Chris, I hate next year we're going into an election year because we're going to have to deal with this all over again from the church, right? This just intense worry or this intense celebration because we get our guy in, right? Whoever your guy is, okay? When we get to heaven, there's no turnover. Right? It is Christ ruling supremely, rightly, forever. No, I wonder who's going to get in 4 years. It is ruling supremely and rightly forever. And I love what he says in verse 5. He says what? Behold, I am making all things new. You know what? It's interesting that he doesn't use the language here, I made all things new. As in, this is something that's already happened in the past. It's I'm doing this. It almost describes heaven as being this ongoing, forever expanding, making things new. And just when you think, man, we've been here 10,000 years, I guess I've experienced all that heaven has to offer. It's almost as if he's saying, but you haven't experienced this yet. New. I'm making all things new. It's sort of like the Garden of Eden, like we go back to Genesis, and there's this assumption that God makes, he makes Adam and Eve and he places them in the garden. Okay, I guess they're going to live there forever. The idea that God places them in there is that they would reproduce and that they'd spread out and they would tame the earth and that they would have dominion over this earth, that it would ever be always expanding. It's almost as if that's what heaven's going to be like. You have the Savior ruling supremely, continually making all things new. Verse 10, he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain. Man, what do you think about that? For those of you who love the mountains, right? John Denver, he loved the Rocky Mountain High, but he might have been talking about something else besides the Rocky Mountains whenever he's singing that song. But I mean, just the beauty of it. And I don't know what you think about heaven, but it shows, it almost paints this picture of being different type terrain in the new heaven and the new earth. And why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be? He's made all the things that we enjoy right now. Why wouldn't it be there? Mountains there. Verse 11, he gets into this description. He says in verse 10, he carried me in the spirit to a great high mountain, and he showed me the holy city. Okay, so wrap your mind around. He's now looking at a city. It's coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Its radiance like a rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. And he describes the walls, and he describes the gates of the city. But get this. It's the city that he's describing. So there's the heavens, there's a new heaven, and there's a new earth, and then there's this city. There's this city within the earth, right? It's a description here of this city that exists on this new earth, in this new heaven. It mentions gates in verse 25. Look at this. Physical gates. Its gates will never be shut. Right? Is that what it says? Its gates will never be shut by day. Why would you not shut a gate? What happens when you don't shut a gate? Like we've got a goat that we show. My daughter shows. You know what happens if we don't shut the gate? That thing's gone. That thing's gone. Why do you leave a gate open?
No fear. No fear of attack.
Yep. Not going to attack. What were you saying? Come and go. Right? We think, okay, I guess I'm going to be on this cloud the rest of my life playing this harp. That's sort of this picture that's been painted from the time we were this big. I guess I'm going to be kind of confined to this city. I'm going to be confined to this mansion, or I'm going to be confined to this room in my Father's house. And this paints the picture of coming and going out of this city into this perfect place that God has created for us to enjoy. This is an incredible, incredible place. Look at verse 15. The one who spoke with me had this measuring rod of gold, and he begins to measure the city and its gates. And all the measurements are here that probably don't mean a whole lot to us in the measurements that used. But here's what Warren Wiersbe says about the walls. He says that the walls of the city are 216 feet tall in the air, and the measurements of this city, okay, like a city of Edmond, where I'm from. Where are we in? Is this War Acres? Is this Oklahoma City? I don't know. War Acres? The city of War Acres. It's a city that is 1,500 square miles. Think Rhode Island, okay? The city of heaven, where God dwells, being the size of Rhode Island, 216 feet tall, into the air. There's room for everyone, right? Room for everyone. There's room for us. It's this massive city, and that might scare you some. Like, I don't know. Like, sometimes I think, man, there's going to be a lot of people there, and get a little nervous. It's going to be glorious with those that we love and those who love the Lord. And it's going to be marvelous. It's a valuable city. Verse 11, look what it says in verse 11. It's got the glory of the Lord, their radiance like the most rare jewels is what it says. Verse 18 talks about the walls being made of jasper, like pure gold, like clear glass. Then it talks in verse 19 through 21, all these jewels that we have sometimes a hard time pronouncing, being all over the place, just this massive beauty. In verse 24, look what it says. By its light will the nations walk, and kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Verse 26, they will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations, saying, here you go, Jesus. It's all for you. And this is a place of massive beauty. It's a literal place. It's beautiful. It's got this throne. It's got these mountains. It's got this city where we can come in and go out. It's got this massiveness to it where everyone has a place. Everyone has room. It's valuable. And it's a literal place. It's not an idea. It's not a place where we go to just sort of rest in peace in some sort of conscious or unconscious state. And it is a literal place that I don't even think John's doing justice as he describes how magnificent and wonderful it is. Everything that we could possibly dream and more. Him making all things new forever, ever expanding, ever new, never get tired place. We see number one, the place. Number two, we see the posture. We see our posture here. And it's a posture of no fear. The gentleman here, what's your name? What's your name?
David.
David said that a second ago, no fear. Let me show you that. Look at verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. That's a little bit of a strange thing to be absent, right? Like the sea is gone. Now there's a river of life, like we see that later, and we see that in chapter 22. We see that, but we see the sea being no more. Now that might be puzzling to us now, but in this century, and all the centuries leading up to it, man, the sea was a terrifying place. I mean, even when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? It was like, you might not come back. Because there were some that thought he's just going to sail right off the face of the earth and be gone. And you study ancient literature, and there was these stories. There's stories of storms on the sea, of serpents in the sea, and it's just a terrifying place. What's John trying to communicate to us here? That this new place is a place without fear. You don't have to fear the unknown. You don't have to fear what's right around the corner. And isn't that what sometimes keeps us up at night, wondering, maybe we've got a rebellious son or daughter and they're addicted to drugs. Don't we set up just wondering when we're going to get the call that it's an overdose? Maybe it's a grandchild. Don't we fear when the doctor calls, wondering if he's going to call and say it's cancer? The cancer's back. We fear the unknown. And when John's saying there's no sea, he's going to say there's nothing else to fear. There is no unknown to fear. Everything that's known, you and I will know, and there's nothing that's going to terrify us. No more calls. No more calls in the middle of the night that just rip the rug out from underneath us, that turn our world upside down. No more of that. No more. A place of no fear, a posture of no fear. That's the same thing in verse 25. Its gates will never be shut by day. There's no one coming to attack. You know, the last thing I do before I go to bed is I make sure all my doors are locked, right? I want to make sure that I'm safe, my wife's safe, my kids are safe. And I can promise you that if I fall asleep before my wife goes to bed, if she goes outside for something, she's going to leave that door unlocked, all right? I woke up the other day, the front door is just unlocked. I woke up and the door's been opened, and I'm thinking, it's only by the grace of God somebody didn't come in and kill us last night. Which is so strange because I grew up in a small town where no one locked their doors, right? State tournaments going on in basketball. If you want to rob a small town, if their team goes to state, that's where you go because no one locks their doors in the small town, all right? The gates are never locked in heaven because there's no one we have to worry about coming in and taking our lives, taking our stuff. No one coming to hurt us. None of that. No fear, a posture of no fear. No one's coming to attack. No one. It mentions in verse 25 here, there will be no night there. So you remember what it was like, right, when you're a kid and you wake up with a bad dream, or maybe your kids woke up with a bad dream, grandkids wake up with a bad dream, and they want to come get in bed with you, right? And it's just as dark in your room, probably maybe darker in your room, but there's something about the presence of mom and dad being right there that sort of drives that night fear away. There's something terrifying for a child to at night. And we don't have to have a show of hands, but just think, how many are still afraid of the dark? I mean, I was pastoring at a church in western Oklahoma. Had just gotten there. It was the fall, hadn't been there very long. In churches, Chris, I don't know if you've ever been in your church at night, but churches are spooky at night. All right, there's something scary about a church at night. And so I'm the last one at church in the evening. It's night. The sun has gone down so much so that there's just barely a snippet of light coming in the window. And I walk around the corner, and I'm going down the hall to go out the door to leave, and I can see about from where I am now to that back wall, outside of this room to the back wall, a long hallway, and I just see these two figures. They're about that big, two figures side by side about that big, and they're not moving. Okay? They are not moving. They're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and I'm in this new church, and so I'm trying to find the light switch. I have no idea where it is. I'm getting my phone out with a flashlight, but the hall's so long, so far down, there's no way, and I'm thinking I'm there by myself, and there's these figures. Now, I've grown up, I watched enough scary movies to know that this is not going to end well. I finally found the light and switched it on, and somebody had decorated for fall, and they'd put a couple little scarecrows or something. And then, who does that at church, right? Who does that? I think they were trying to scare me. And there's just something unnerving, something scary, something unknown about the dark. John wants us to be reminded that there's no more of that. No more. No more. No fear. That's the posture, no fear, but not just no fear, also no sorrow. Verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away. Can you imagine? Can you imagine no sorrow? No more grieving the loss of a spouse that's been gone for years, but it's just still the pain there. My wife lost her mom to leukemia when she was 11, and lost her dad to leukemia when she was 28, I think, is what she was. And she still mourns them. There are days that she still picks up the phone to call her dad to tell her something. Oh yeah, he's passed. She went through puberty without a mom, went through graduation without a mom, went through getting married without a mom, went through having her kids without a mom, and still just grieves that hole. And you've got your own, right? You've got your own. One of these days, not going to be like that. Some of you have met my daughter because we visited here one Sunday when I was off during the summer. She's a little redhead in a wheelchair. You might have seen her. Some of you have. She suffered a stroke during an open heart surgery that has placed her in that wheelchair, and we've been praying every day for 7 years that God would heal her. One of these days He's going to. Maybe it's on this earth. He's going to just touch her and heal her, or in heaven, right? One of these days our prayers will be answered, and I'll dance with that little girl outside of that chair. It's coming. Can you imagine a day with no sorrow? Because that's the posture. There's no fear, that there's no sorrow, that there's no dissatisfaction. Look at verse 6. It's done. I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the to the thirsty, I'll give from the spring of water of life without payment. Now that's a good thing. That's a good thing, especially when you have 5 kids and everywhere you go, like you have to kind of go, like we go to Sam's to eat lunch, right? Because you go down the aisles and get the little samples because we don't want to pay for 5 kids plus parents for lunch because you can't afford it, right? And what's offered here is this satisfaction. It's almost as if take as much as you want. Don't worry about payment. I've already covered it. So when we got married, we went to Cancun on one of these all-inclusive trips. All-inclusive is pretty cool because you pay everything up front. Then you can eat whatever you want while you're there and not feel guilty about spending the money, right? And so what we do, we stay at this place and they had like 7 restaurants. And so we'd like go here for an appetizer and then here for a dinner. Oh, it wasn't very good. So we went over here for a dinner, got dessert over there. Didn't have to pay anything, right? Because we'd already paid for it up front. It's all inclusive. We could eat whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, already taken care of. It's all here. It's all here. No dissatisfaction, no want, no need. It's here, and it's paid for. What about this? The posture of no sin. We see that in verse 8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, liars, their portion will be in the lake of fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Some of those things I read and I'm thinking, yeah, they'll be in the lake of fire. But then there's some others. What about cowardly? Liars? Some of these things describe maybe even us this week. You know what's incredible? That as believers, we struggle with sin here on this earth. Or maybe it's just pastors. Like maybe it's just me and Chris. Like we're the ones that struggle. No, we struggle with sin here on this earth. But when Christ comes for us, no more struggling. The reason that these are not in heaven, it's not because they're exempt. It's not that they're beyond the saving faith, the saving power of Christ. It's just that by the time He returns for us and calls us home, He has glorified us in a way that we're exactly like Christ. Like we talked in my church today, you can get the notes from Janelle later. She's sitting right there. Ask her about what I preached on. I preached on sanctification. How when Christ saves us for the rest of our lives, He's chiseling sin out of us and growing us. But it takes a lifetime, right? Like none of us are exempt from sin. But when we get here, we are. We are. Not just exempt from sin, but exempt from the struggle of sin. He echoes that in verse 27. Nothing unclean will ever enter, nor anyone who does what's detestable or false. But the ones who are perfect. No, that's not what it says. It says the ones whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to no sin. And I'm looking forward to not even struggling with sin. That's the posture. No fear, no sorrow, no dissatisfaction, no sin, but also a posture of praise. Look at verse 5. He's seated on the throne. Earlier in Revelation, you read about this, the throne room of heaven, where every tribe, every tongue, every nation is gathered around this throne, just worshiping, just praising Him. That's the same throne that's mentioned here in verse 5. Verse 22 says, no temple. Right? No temple in the city, for the temple is the Lord Almighty and the Lamb. The city, it has no need of sun, no moon to shine up for the glory of God. The glory of God gives its light. Its lamp is the Lamb. That's what we're glorifying, and that's what we're praising. We're gathered around praising Christ. By its light will the nations walk. The kings of the earth will bring in their glory. Its gates will never be shut by day. There will be no night. Verse 26, they will bring in the glory and honor of the nations. All for Christ. All for Christ. Endless joy. Endless satisfaction. No sorrow. No sin. No fear. no dissatisfaction, but just constantly the joy of praising our Father, praising our Savior. We see here the place. Number 2, we see the posture. And number 3 here in this text, we see the presence. Not presence as in it's Christmas and you're going to unwrap thing, but presence, P-R-E-N-S-C-E-N. Wait, let me read this. It's in my head. P-R-E-S-E-N-C-E, the presence of God. Now it mentions here who's going to be in heaven. It talks about the bride of Christ, the church, right? It talks about believers. It talks in verse 24 of the nations and the kings, the believers, right? They're going to be there in the presence of heaven. We're going to be able to see them. What about this? Those who have gone before us, right? I've got a aunt that was the godliest woman I've ever met. And I preached her funeral a couple years ago. I'm going to see her again one of these days. My grandma, my grandpa, 3 babies we never got to hold due to miscarriage. Man, I'm looking forward to a lot of people in heaven, right? But that's just like a little bit of icing on the cake. That's not even the good part about heaven, as glorious and as long. The best part is that Jesus is going to be there. Look at verse 3. I heard a loud voice from them. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. We're going to be with God. We're going to be with Jesus. He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them as their God. He's going to wipe away every tear from our eyes. Death will be no more. All this because Christ is there to wipe away the tears from our eyes. Jesus is the best part. Don't get sidetracked by heaven. Okay? I mean, we're a little bit like Abraham, where God's like, I'm going to make you into this great nation, and I'm going to get and so He's like, okay, yeah, that sounds really good, and I'm going to give you the land. And He almost stops. He's like, wait, there's land? You know, that's sort of like what we are right here. You and I, we get sidetracked by heaven. We get sidetracked by what's our mansion going to look like? How much fun are we going to have? Who are we? We're going to get to see our loved ones. Don't get sidetracked. Don't miss the fact that Jesus is going to be there. That's what makes heaven heaven. You know, the song that's played nearly at every funeral these days is I Can Only Imagine. Remember that one? I Can Only Imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in all of you just be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I even be able to speak at all? Heaven is heaven because Jesus is there. And one of these days we're going to get to understand the Trinity. Can you, like we're in the Gospel Project. We do the Gospel Project. I don't know if y'all are doing that, but we're in the book of John. And we're talking about how the Word became flesh, how Jesus is the eternal Son of God, how this Trinity has always existed. And it's like, okay, how do you explain that? How do you explain something you can't even understand? Right? One of these days, we're going to be in the presence of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and we're going to know. We're going to know then. We're going to understand it then. Be in His presence. Look at verse 22. I want to point this out. I saw no temple in the city, which would have floored those reading this, hearing this. Would have floored John that there's no temple in the city. Why? For its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. Would have been shocking that in heaven that there's no church, right? There's no temple. Would have floored him because, listen, even in first century, they still gathered at the temple. You read the book of Acts, and it said day by day they would gather there at the temple and and worship and spend time in the Word. Just a part of even the first church's life. And that, it's a part of our life too, right? We say, I'm going to church, right? It would have floored them here that there's no place to go to worship the Lord. There's no temple here. It's not there. But even as you backtrack and you begin to look at how heaven, how the city, how the New Jerusalem, not just heaven, not the new earth, not the new heaven, but how the city in the new heaven and new earth is mapped out with just this cube, just the dimension here. It almost takes you back to the temple in the Old Testament, where the holy of, you had this place where you would go, and this place you'd sacrifice, and then there was the Holy of Holies. It's almost as if this entire city has become the Holy of Holies. There's not a need for a temple. There's not a need of a place to go, because Christ permeates and radiates everywhere. The whole world, the whole city, the whole earth, the whole new heaven, the new earth has become the temple. It's become the Holy of Holies, radiates with the glory of God. There's no place you go in the New Jerusalem or the new heaven or the new earth that Christ is not there in a real sense. We go to Falls Creek every year, and there's just something special about that place, or at least we treat it that way, right? Like we go there, and our students are there all week, and they come back with this. We call it the Falls Creek High, right? That's what we call it. We call it the Falls Creek High, and we think there's something special and holy about stepping foot on Falls Creek. Like before, I'm not in a holy place, and I step foot on Falls Creek, and now I'm in this holy place. What makes that place special is from morning till bedtime, everything is saturated with Christ. Okay, so you wake up and you do your devotionals about Jesus. Then you go to some worship there in the morning, and then you come back and play games in the afternoon. And they're like, oh, by the way, let me tell you how climbing this rock wall reminds me of Jesus. That's what the people who work there are trained to do. And then you come back and you go to worship about Jesus, and then you come back to your cabin and you sing some more about Jesus and hear another devotional about Jesus. Then you go back to your dorms, and before you fall asleep, you're praying about Jesus. What's so incredible for these students that come back is that they've spent a week with Jesus. Can you imagine what forever with Jesus is going to be like? His presence is what makes it heaven. John Piper asked this question one time. He said, if you could have heaven with all it is, if you could have heaven with no sorrow, if you could have heaven with no sickness, if you could have heaven with no sin, if you could have heaven with the streets of gold, and with heaven with the beauty, if you could have heaven with this new earth and this new heaven and this new city, if you could have all of that, but Jesus wasn't there, would you be satisfied? I think sometimes, I think we know the answer. I think we need to wrestle with that question. Because heaven's not a place of reward. Oh, you guys figured it out. Come on. Heaven, even though there is reward there, heaven is a place. Heaven is heaven because Jesus is there. See, it's almost back to the Garden of Eden, right? We sing that hymn, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I'm his own. Like Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. That's where we are. We're back. We're back to this redeemed place. This completely redeemed people in the presence of our King. It's going to be glorious. The question is, what do we do while we wait? Right? What do we do? I would argue that churches in our day have made a critical mistake of just saying, hey, let's just circle the wagons. We're going to be there someday. Let's circle the wagons. Let's not push really hard into culture. They're crazy. They're going to hell in a handbasket. Let's just sort of circle the wagons and wait till he calls us home. Can I tell you that you have a role now while you're on this earth? You will not get another chance. You will not get another chance to live for Christ on this earth. You will not get another chance to share Christ with the people in your lives. Your life will be over and that's it. You have a role now to play to connect people to Jesus. One of these days we're going to be at the wedding supper of the Lamb. That's how Revelation ends, right? It ends with this wedding supper of the Lamb where we're gathered, and we're seeing part of this. We're gathered around in His presence, and we're going to tell stories. Like I know our God is a storytelling God, and so I just figure we're going to tell some stories, and we're going to get to hear things like firsthand what it was like for the Israelites to walk through the Red Sea on dry ground. Like, you ever wondered about that? Like, we have it in our mind, but we're going to hear firsthand accounts. We're going to hear what it was like for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to go into the fiery furnace. They're going to tell us. Daniel is going to tell us what it was like to be in that lion's den. Jonah is going to tell us what it was like to be in the belly of a fish for 3 days, right? We're going to get there, and I've got questions. Like I want to know how the apostles discipled 3,000 people without Lifeway, right? No curriculum. How'd they disciple 3,000 people? Peter's going to talk about how the chains fell out and they just walked right on out. Stephen's going to talk about how he was stoned to death, and Paul's like, "Yeah, I was in on that one. That was my fault. My bad." And we're going to tell stories, and there's probably going to be a lot of laughter, right? Because that's just something God has put in us. To laugh with good friends. And we're going to hear firsthand accounts, and I just think we're just going to be in awe as we hear about Christ's redemptive work in stories that we've only read, firsthand accounts. And then Cherokee Hills, it's going to get to your time to share your stories. I wonder what they're going to be.